after I talk, then I'll adjust this. Okay. Dr. Dennerline is a professor in Asian Studies at Amherst College, professor of History and Asian Languages, Civilization, China and East Asia. He has written 3 books, which is Qianwu and the World of Seven Nations, Middle Kingdoms and Empires, Culture and Power in Chinese History, the Jiading Loyalists, Confucian Leadership and Social Change in the 17th century China. Right? So let us give him a round of applause. So let me just adjust the microphone over here and then we'll do his best. As always. Okay.
This has to be closer. I can't talk like this. Oh, you did it. Oh. How's that? Can you hear me? Can you hear me anyway? Yes. So, thank you very much. I want to thank Bert, Colin, Joe, and everybody else who's helped me, but especially Bert for doing this and inviting me to do this. I guess from the introduction you can tell I'm an oddball here. I'm really an outsider to this place. But I've been coming around here for 12 years, and I'm a historian. I'm very interested in China. I'm very interested in local histories. So I couldn't help but get involved. And here I am. So I want to say thanks. And this is a challenge for me, and it may be a challenge for you too, because I'm a historian. So I'm not just showing slides of cultural heritage things. I'm going to talk about history, and everybody knows that's the most boring subject. So I hope that it cannot bore you. Now, first of all, I'll say one thing about the history and my way of thinking about it, and that is that it's not one but very many storylines. So I can't think of doing a history of Malacca or even 1 year in Malacca as one narrative. I can only think about many, many stories that happen to come together in funny ways. So what I'm going to do is try to draw some of those stories together in ways that I found very interesting in looking at this 1 year. I would also say that this is one theme, that how these stories come together, and what are the personal stories and social networks of people in doing this. Then, another theme tonight will be education, the content of education, the funding of education, and thinking about educational policy, because that in 1933, that happened to be a big debate that was going on in the newspaper. Finally, I'm going to be using the Malacca Guardian, which is the local newspaper in English, weekly paper in Malacca. Unfortunately, we do not have in Malacca a run of the Malacca Guardian. And so one thing I would do is plead with everyone here to try to do something to get this thing on microfilm, because if I can sit it in the United States at my college, borrow this thing on microfilm and do what I'm doing, you should be able to do it here in Malacca. So we're going to get it from Singapore and get a copy so we can do something with it. But I wanted to do as Margaret wanted us to think last time about what we can learn that's often contrary to what we think we know from looking at photographs and what we can learn about music and its history and its place. I hope that we can do the same thing by looking closely at newspaper articles, because they're full of information. They have certain perspective in them, and often when you try to answer questions by looking at the paper, you just have more questions than you ask. And this is the exciting thing about doing this kind of work. So that's what I wanted to say to start with. Now, why 1933? For those of you, I guess everybody's familiar with the Long Kong Festival. So 1933 was a Long Kong year. So what I did was, I started thinking, this is an important part of Malacca's heritage, but also when I realized that the Malacca Guardian had really done amateur ethnography about this Long Kong Festival for the whole year, and then published that little this little volume about it. I thought this would be a very good year to try to work on. And also I was interested in religion and festivals and so on, and here's the thing they produced. But you go back to the newspaper for that year, there's a lot more information. So that's would be a good year to start with, and there's lots of detail there. But there's another method in my madness, because what I want to do is find out what else is going on in 1933. So I look through the whole year, and I find there's so much going on. I have to be very selective about what I pull out, and I don't know where this is all going to end up. But you're stuck with listening to me for a little while tonight about it. So that was too long an introduction, and now we're going to start. The idea of, the Sleepy Hollow, we always hear Malacca was a Sleepy Hollow, but we don't really know. They actually said that about Malacca, so I found this article, 1891. This is from Strange Times Weekly in 1891, and somebody had made a visit to Malacca and says, Sleepy Hollow is frequently used, and occasionally it becomes rather wearisome in its frequency, yet one recognizes the truth of its appellation when you go there. So he's saying, wow, this is the most boring place in the world. And the whole article goes on like this. He says, it's like a piece of nature that is inanimate. Nothing ever happens. The cricket teams, nobody ever really likes to play cricket, but they play. And then they go to the club and they sit around, instead of chatting with one another the way we do in Singapore, they all sit down around a table and just sort of stare at each other glumly. He says, that's what does he call it? He says, this is the general tenor of life in Malacca. So this is 1891. Then he says, well, some fellow came up and said that he has been in Malacca the longest of any European. So naturally we asked him how long. He said 4 years. He says, so fortunately, they turn over very rapidly. Nobody has to stay there very long. Right? So that's the complimentary version of Sleepy Hollow. Now this is a cartoon by Yankee Leon. We call him Yankee Leon, which Margaret showed last month. And I thought, here is 1933 Malacca. And so, what do we see especially that we want to pay attention to? I have a pointer here somewhere, but we can't be able to find it. Anyway, you can see it. So what you see in this cartoon is a lot of interesting information. Now, part of it is, of course, all the technology, right? So here is what's changed in Malacca. We have wireless, we have radio, we have recordings, we have culture coming in from everywhere. I want you to notice, here's our non-Sion music. We also have jazz music, that's coming from the U.S. We have Mau Mau Yi, which happened to be a very popular current tune in Shanghai, and it was on record. So we have the recording come from Shanghai to Malacca, people listening to. Here we have these other things. And of course, Yankee Leon has an attitude about this. He's saying, look, here's the guy who's making all the money. This is about making money, and here's the commerce. And here's what it does to us. The guy's probably going to have a heart attack because of all the noise, right? So this is the exciting version of Malacca 1933. So I put up a couple of other slides of things that were going on. The Malacca City Park had opened just the year before, and they're doing things like the Noran Opera of Malacca, and they're doing boxing and many other things. This is popular entertainment. Well, that's brand new, but notice the Noran Opera is playing Shakespeare, and they're playing Malay stories, and all of the kinds of things. And these are the actors who are going to be populating the film industry in Malaysia in coming years, right? Then we have, not even in the city park, this is a traveling show, vaudeville and hula hula and death-defying races around the tube on motorcycles. So it gives you an idea of what we're supposed to think about what is exciting in 1933. Here is a notice that says the park has been closed for vacation, now it's reopening. I want you to notice from this, fireworks. It is in celebration of the anniversary of the Republic of China on 10/10, right? So this is October 10th. Now this is a clue as to what life is like back then, and China is going to start figuring in a kind of large way in our story. Now, as we go on, here is the image of Hong Kong from April, in April 1934. So Hong Kong is all over, but here was the grand event of the year. it was deep cultural heritage, religious tradition, and it was unique in the world. There wasn't a Hong Kong anyplace else like this. Now it was over, and people continued to reflect on it for months after it was over. Now this is, one of the reflections was a little article that said, hey, did you notice? People are winning the lottery in Malacca. There have been several people that won the lottery in Malacca. Blessings are coming from the Hong Kong. This is also, business is improving, the small business. And so here is Yang Ki-Leung's take on that. So here's the Hong Kong going, the prayers, and so on. Peace, prosperity, plenty, let it be in Malacca. There's all the money. And now, there's some funny part of this. Like, what does he mean? Here's the money pouring out, deep religious significance, whatever. It's about making money. And here we have all the money going to Chinese. Now, the question for you, for me, and everybody else is, who are these people? These are the people who are saying, what about a Hong Kong by us? Maybe we should have a Hong Kong. So, come back to this, and you can see these figures. Start thinking for yourself who these people are and why they're here in this cartoon. I'm not going to answer the questions. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Now, we're going to now talk about the context for this. I want to start with the global context because Malacca was very much a part of the world, as we have seen by the music. And so what is going on in the world? And we're going to point to a few things. First, there is a world depression going on, right? The world depression going on for Malacca means the price of rubber has bottomed out. So the whole economy of Malacca at that time is based on the rubber market. So they're suffering from this. Second point, 1933, Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. This is what is in the newspaper. Between January and May of 1933, this is what's in the newspaper. They've seized power in Germany. Then comes Japan's control of Manchuria. Manchuria, you know, was seized by Japan in 1931, in September. And there's an upshot of that. When that happened, there was a resistance of Chinese. And there were some army units resisting. And so Shanghai, there began to be an attack, popular attack on the Japanese in Shanghai. And this was about Manchuria. So the Japanese bombed Shanghai. And it was in the newsreels, it was a horrible thing, and you see babies crying in the streets, death and destruction. So there was resistance there. And we want to be aware of this because that bombing of Shanghai in January of 1932 led to the popularity of something called the 19th Route Army, which you probably haven't heard of. The 19th Route Army was the nationalist army that was located in Shanghai, and they went to war with the Japanese at that point. They were doing a good job of fighting this. But the nationalist government had to compromise with the Japanese. They didn't want to have a war, and they pulled back the army and said, okay, we will have peace in Shanghai. It's an international settlement, it's not Japanese, but we're not going to fight with it. Well, the 19th Route Army then, over the next year, was very, very popular. And it was very popular in Malacca as well as everywhere in the Chinese world. So what we want to know is that the 19th Route Army was sent from Shanghai to guess where? Down here. This is on the border between Fujian province and Jiangxi province. And that's where the communists were. In 1933, the communists were not up here, they weren't in the cities, they were here, building a Soviet. So the nationalists went to fight the communists down there, and it's on the border of Fujian province. So the 19th Route Army was supposed to fight them. What happened in 1933, in fact, was the army rebelled. So during the course of 1933, the 19th Route Army was negotiating with the communists, and in November of 1933, they declared an independent and autonomous Fujian province. Now this is something that we don't usually know, but it's important for the Hokkien people all over Southeast Asia, and especially in Malacca, so it's going to figure in our story. All right. So those are the global pictures that I want to stress. As for the local business, I want us to look at the population figures very quickly. This was, again, this is in the tourist guide that that Audrey lent us last week, and this one that I've seen before. So what I want you to notice, the population here says 186,000. I've seen other figures that had it higher than that, as high as 220,000 in 1931. But the main point is here, first of all, that 51, this is the state of Malacca. This is all of Malacca, not the city. So 51% of the population was Malay, 35 Chinese, 13 Indian at this time. The development since 1891 was that the population had grown 2.5 to 3 times in Malacca. It was a boom town because of rubber. And the population of the city was vast majority Chinese. So this was becoming a Chinese city. So the Straits Chinese and the China-born Chinese were all living here in a boom town that was growing very rapidly. This one you can't see very well, but this is to give you a sense of numbers. And there's a number here that I really like. This is the Capitol Theater, right? The Capitol Theater up here was just opened the year before. It's 1 year old. It's the best talking theater in Southeast Asia. Trust me, the Prince of Siam came and said it's better than the one in Bangkok. This is the best theater around. Talking theater. 100,000 Singapore dollars or Straits dollars it costs to build that. What I want to compare that to is for $500, the Meng Seng Free Clinic, right? This is a free charitable clinic, Chinese. For $500 in 1 month, they had 1,447 free visits to the clinic. We translate that into years, the number is 17,000 per year, or $6,000. 6% of the cost of building the Capitol Theater served 17,000 free visits to the clinic. Now we can start thinking comparatively. You think whatever you want, know what that means. Here's another figure, shows St. Francis Institution, private institution. It costs $70 per pupil per year. $70 per pupil per year, that was the cost at that. But then here's the Malacca High School, it was $174. So some of the discussion about how to pay for education in Malacca revolves around some of these figures. Okay, so here's the map, and here is where a lot of the expansion was going on at the time. Here, of course, the Kampung Pantai was the already developed Chinese community, recent Chinese community. Here is what was then called Wolferston Road. Here is the Capitol Theater on Wolferston Road, right? Right there. And I want, right next to that, by the way, there is a home. I'm going to be referring to a gentleman by the name of Ho Bao Chin later on. His home was on Wolferston Road. And the city park is up here, the other activities. This is the kind of, big part of town up here. And here's the other part that we're all very familiar with. All right. Now, we're going to start looking at things that were in the newspaper. I'll try to be fairly quick with this because time is moving on. Here is one. The Payphone School in December celebrated its 20th anniversary. Now, that would mean this year it's celebrating its 100th anniversary, right? So what were they saying about 20 years of the Payphone School in 1933? So remember, first of all, this was a private school, all private. And it had a history, we're going to go over in a minute. But the article here makes mention of especially the library. So the Payphone School Library, after 20 years, being started with, grade 1, has 7,000 books. And this is the best Chinese library around. So they're bragging about this. And this is the Malacca Guardian reporter who's bragging about it. You also notice here the Chinese dignitaries who sent greetings on the 20th anniversary. They include Chiang Kai-shek, General Tsai Ting-kai, who was head of the 19th Third Army, Wang Teng-jing, and several other people whom you may or may not know. But these are the kind of the very influential, these are the people who run the country of China and who are the elders of the overseas Chinese, sending their greetings. The principal of the school is Mr. Ye Hua Fan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about him later too. Another Malacca person that we probably don't know. All right. Now, this happens to be a textbook. See, the date is 1912. This is an early Chinese language textbook that was used in these schools. Not necessarily in 1933. I want to point out that it says this is for overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, this textbook. It is a primer, and the symbols are of the Republic of China, 1912. It had only just been established in 1912. And they were publishing these textbooks already. very proudly. It just says the student goes into the school and the professor, the teacher asks him, why are you coming to school? And he says, because my mom and dad want me to. And he says, I've come here in order to read and write. And he says, so that's very good. This is what you need to do in order to become a good citizen and so on. So that's the kind of thing that we're teaching them. Now, the history of the school, I've got to do very briefly. You may recognize these pictures. This is Sim Hong Peck, who is the father of all the Sims in Malacca, 1,000 of them. This is Tan Chien, who is the father of the rubber industry. They were co-founders. They were two of the three founders of the school in 1913. But Sim Hong Peck was, well, let me say first about what the purpose was. The idea was to teach the Chinese children in Mandarin. Remember, they're speaking 5 different dialects at home. So we're going to teach them in Mandarin so they have a common language. We're going to teach them to read and write. And we're going to teach them English. And we're going to teach them science and geography and everything else. But they're to learn both Chinese and English. And the Chinese is going to be universal Chinese. So this was a really hefty goal for the first time. And it was one of the first schools to do this in the colonies entirely. It was all funded by the rubber plantation profits. So all these people were planters. And it's the story of rubber in Malacca was the story between 1904 and 1910. And they managed to keep control of the rubber and not have it bought out by Europeans. So that rubber funding went into building this first very good Chinese school. We should also know that immediately, 1917, the Pei-Tek School was founded, so we have the girls' school just 4 years later, and in 1922, the Pingmen School. The Pingmen School was a free school for Chinese who couldn't afford to pay. So you can see the logical development here, and also the idea about what an education is supposed to be for Chinese school. 1925, the middle school opened for 3 years, 3 grades. So we now have 9 years of education. Now, I want you to notice the difference in backgrounds, of course, between these 3 people. And here are these 2, and the next one is Chen Pang Sui. Chen Pang Sui was the richest man in Malacca at this time, in the 1930s. He was a great philanthropist. In 1913, he was a colleague of these people and Pan Shan Wak in the rubber industry, right? But his roots were in Kampung Pan.